Thank you for watching CTR TV. I'm Christy Olds, and we have a special report today. We are discussing an issue that many realtors may not think of when they're showing a property. It's the existence of dams on properties and what it means for homeowners when they do have a dam on that property. Joining us today are Sally Harold from the Nature Conservancy. You are the Director of River Restoration and Fish Passage.
Never an easy one to say.
It is tough to get out. And Gwen MacDonald from Save the Sound, the Director of Ecological Restoration. So we're talking about dams, and Connecticut has a lot of them, don't we?
We do. Most people don't realize we actually have over 4,000 dams in our state, and that's in about 5,800 miles of river. The dams we're talking about today are not those made by beavers. We're talking about man-made dams.
It's hard to track the ones made by beavers, right?
Right, we don't try.
And even with that 4,400, I believe the number is, that doesn't even account for all of them, right? Those are just the registered ones.
Those are the dams that we know about, right? All dams are supposed to be registered. There aren't even 4,000 that have been registered, but we do know that there are about 4,400 or maybe more. We seem to find them every time we're out in a river, but that those are in existence for sure.
And a lot of those are actually on private property, not those big, massive reservoir-type dams people probably think of when you say the word dam.
That's right. Yeah, the vast majority of dams in Connecticut are privately owned. The state owns about 260 dams, and then there are dams that people think about for drinking water supply or flood control, but that is a very small percentage compared to the privately owned dams, many of which are not maintained the way they were when there was a miller or someone in sort of pre-industrial times that was responsible for maintaining them. And so a lot of people may not even know that they're a dam owner.
So why is it important to know whether or not you're a dam owner or you're not?
Well, the reason we're here, and thank you for this opportunity to help inform people about the importance of dams and knowing whether or not you own one, is that you're responsible for maintaining dams in safe condition. So you need to know that it exists so that you need to know you can maintain it. Dams need to be maintained in safe condition because it's a public safety risk should they fail. They can catastrophically fail and cause damage to infrastructure, roadways, property downstream. We've heard about recent cases in California and Brazil just in the last year or so where there have been massive failures or near failures that, either there was tremendous loss of life or threatened loss of life. So people need to know that they are taking on that responsibility when they buy a property with a dam on it. And they're not always obvious. It may be back in the woods. It may look like something else, like a waterfall.
I was going to say, you mentioned that it may not always be obvious. We have water features on a lot of properties. A lot of people like those, but you may not realize that that's actually a dam that needs to be maintained and registered and kept up.
That's correct.
Yeah, so there's a range of different sizes of dams, and so for the larger, more obvious dams, those are also they may be associated with a higher hazard classification, and that relates to what the potential for downstream impact would be if the dam were to fail. And so if there was a school or a road or homes downstream, then the hazard class would be higher. And so for higher hazard classification dams, there is currently a requirement for those dams to have an emergency operating plan and to be disclosed. So if someone were to be purchasing a home and a realtor were to show them, they currently, that information would be on the land record. But for the low and moderate hazard classification dams that may have some property damage if the dam were to fail, an owner still has liability there, but they are not required to disclose that on the land record.
When we're talking about failure, obviously if the dam is larger, it could be more catastrophic, but a lot of the dams we're talking about are smaller. They're either in the woods or a small waterfall. It's not major damage, but it's still damage that the property owner would be responsible for.
That's correct. And since 2013, there was a regulation passed in Connecticut that requires all dam owners, so you mentioned that dams have to be registered, so that's sort of a first step. then the Dam Safety Division at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection knows of the existence of the dam. Then they are assigned a hazard classification, which Gwen just mentioned. But dams also have to be inspected periodically by a licensed engineer. And so those inspections may cost upwards from $2,500. And starting with a low hazard dam, it may be that they only have to be inspected every 10 years. And then going up in the hazard rating, they will go from 10 to 7 to 5 to 2 years. And so that's an ongoing expense for any dam owner that has to incur that cost, and give some people pause when they think about how that money might otherwise be spent if they don't need the dam there.
Can we look at some examples of things that people might not think of as dams, but when you're looking at a property you might want to consider?
We said, sometimes dams are quite obvious. Sometimes they run right under a driveway. Sometimes they're out in the middle of, you'll see the stream coming through the property. You might have a property like this. This is Jordan Mill Dam, and there's actually a walkway. So from one side of the walkway, you'd be looking upstream into a pond, and downstream, you'd be seeing a river. It's shallow, it's moving quickly. And so that's probably a more obvious dam, right?
Mm-hmm. And then here on Whitford Brook, there's an example of a dam that you might not at first know that there's a structure there holding back what looks like a pond or a lake. So there's a house adjacent to this. This dam is privately owned, but it's a little walk in the woods to get to the structure itself, and it's hard to see through the trees. So that might be an example of one that's hard to see because of its location.
Sometimes people buy properties because they are, sitting at the edge of a pond, and it really seems like it's a beautiful place to live and to enjoy the pond. You may have a little rowboat, you may go fishing with your grandchildren, and then when a storm comes, the dam and that pond can look quite different. And in this case, this was up in Stonington, and this dam was removed. This is on Anguilla Brook. And downstream, there was a neighborhood, a subdivision that had been evacuated 3 times because they were concerned that this dam was going to catastrophically fail. So if you think of a pond behind a dam being a large bucket of water, the bigger that bucket is, if it tips over, that's sort of the idea of how much damage could be caused downstream.
You touched on removal of dams. That is one option for people who maybe don't want to maintain or restore a dam on their property, right?
Dam removal has a lot of ecological benefits, which is one of the reasons that Sally and I are here talking to you today. But there's also benefits to reducing liability and long-term costs and that leads private owners to be interested in dam removal as well. As far as the ecological benefits, dams are a barrier to migratory fish, but they also are a barrier to water and sediment moving up and downstream. And so those ecological processes, that's how sand sort of moves onto our beaches to nourish beaches. It reduces stream temperature. So for people who are maybe trout fishermen would understand that the water temperature is a really important function. And then species out in Long Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean also rely on fish that travel up into our streams to reproduce. So there's all sorts of positive benefits of dam removal. From a homeowner's perspective or a realtor's perspective, there are more resources available for dam owners that are interested in removal than there are for dam owners that are interested in repair.
That was going to be my next question. Are there funds available? Are there resources available for either of these options?
So there's funds available for removal from a lot of different ecological grant opportunities, both from the state and the federal government, and organizations like Sally's and mine are there to help people who are interested in removing dams for an environmentally beneficial reason.
Many people have the idea that dams and rivers are maintained by the state. That if there is a structure there and it's recognized that it's a man-made dam, that somebody else has responsibility for that. So that's sort of the first thing. But then even going back a step further, if you're looking at a house on Old Mill Road, well, you might want to see if there's a dam associated with the mill that may no longer exist. And if so, are you going to be the partial owner of that dam? If you wish to remove the dam, if you own it in part or in full, are you going to have an agreement with the neighbor maybe across the stream who owns half the dam? We find this again and again, that property lines are actually down the middle of a stream. There may be people that have built up houses around that pond, so the big bucket, and they may not want to get rid of the pond. And so now you have a financial obligation, but you have neighbors who feel just quite happy that you have that obligation and that they want to have that dam in place so that they can enjoy the, the resources that they've always had.
I mean, those are some of the potential I guess, flags that might introduce the idea of a dam on a property. But if they suspect that there is a dam or could be a dam on a property, the Division of Dam Safety at the state of Connecticut is the entity to get in touch with. And so there is a list, a publicly accessible list that lists all of the dam inspection schedule. So if somebody has been notified that they need a dam inspection, it would be available there. And they can also contact Dam Safety if in fact there is a dam on a property to learn what the owner's obligations would be.
And even if they don't know if there's a dam, they could contact Dam Safety and ask the engineers there whether there's a dam on Anguilla Brook or the Hammonasset River at this location. This is a property in Killingworth that was sold a number of years ago, and it was part of the reason that I really took this charge on, that said to Gwen and others, I think this really needs to be a disclosure item, that when somebody is purchasing a property, they're told as much as they can be told about what they're taking on. So in this case, this is a 280-foot long dry laid stone. It looks like a wall.
It does look like a stone wall.
And you'll see this road that went right underneath it. If I show you the other view, there's quite a big pond above it. And the person who bought this property, she didn't buy the entire pond, but her property line went across the pond and incorporated the entire 280-foot long dam, which in some cases would have had no hazard rating, except that at some point that roadway that you saw in the first photo was put in to access a larger piece of property on the other side of the pond that was then built as a subdivision, a private road. So now if her dam failed, that private road that gave access to, another 10 houses, it would have caused them to be high and dry, their road flooded out, and they would have had no access to their homes. So that dam, even though it wasn't very tall, had a hazard rating, and she was required to inspect it and repair that dam. When she purchased the property, the dam was already in poor condition, and the seller knew that the dam needed repairs. She didn't understand that when she bought the property. The dam this summer was breached enough, so a chunk was taken out of the middle so that Dam Safety no longer considers it a dam, and everybody's happy. She's especially happy because it didn't fail and she didn't cause this major damage to that roadway or problems for her neighbors.
And the cost to repair that would have been how much?
The cost to repair it was about $150,000, and the work she did on it to even breach it was about $70,000. So still a significant cost.
And she was unaware when she purchased the property
Yeah,
that was her responsibility.
Yes, completely. She may not have been somebody who would go out and walk the property lines. So there are things that home buyers should do as well, to look carefully at a map. And say if you see a river coming down on the map, and then you see a large body of water, and then you see a river continuing downstream,
that's a dead
there's
giveaway.
There's probably something there that's causing that impoundment.
Anything else either of you would like to touch on or add?
Well, thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you for watching CTR TV. I'm Christy Olds.